Midnight was approaching. Long after the others had fallen asleep, I found myself tossing and turning in my futon, as I do. Instead, I gazed up at the glow of the constellations above my head, hoping that the night would pass soon. Just then, I heard a rustling sound near me, sensing that someone had awoken. I feigned being asleep, and I soundlessly turned to lie on my side to see who it was. It was Saito. Shock. He was being careful to sneak out quietly, and without making a peep, he exited where we were sleeping. Where could he be going? Perhaps a solemn place where he could stare longingly at the moonlight, safe in the shelter of the night? As he left the camp, I noticed his sunken, lonesome expression, so I silently followed closely behind him, hoping to get a peek into his plan. This poor boy, he can't get away from her. She's always following. I found Saito alone, just as I did back in Kofu, and his eyes were fixed on the pattern of sconces shining throughout the patchwork of the night sky. Saito. I timidly called out to him, and he waited a second before turning to look over his shoulder.
Has our conversation about your penchant for wandering around alone been forgotten again?
His words were, surprisingly, not as thorny as I'd expected. Perhaps he was still occupied with unpacking all that Hijikata had told us earlier, which felt like a shadow ominously looming in our hearts. Yes, I had a feeling you'd say that. May I stay beside you? Saito didn't answer. Instead, he continued to stare at the sky. If I knew Saito, his reluctance to speak hadn't indicated an opposition to what I'd asked. Yeah, I'm like, he didn't say no. I stepped onto the grass, watching my steps through the darkness to stand beside Saito. The only sounds around us were the chirp of insects humming in our ear, scattered throughout the forest. Such a beautiful boy.
Where did we go wrong?
Saito's voice just barely hovered above a murmur. I nearly confused it with a cicada chirp. Really? Wrong?
What Heisuke had suggested earlier. That Sanan had, somewhere along the way, fallen astray. I have contemplated the answer to this question for some time now.
It seems Saito was speaking to himself rather than asking me what I had thought about the situation.
And as Heisuke said, there was a time in which his duties as a warrior were upheld with pride. It begs the question, when did his heart go missing?
Well, his question demanded a thoughtful answer, and honestly, I questioned whether or not such an answer existed. Even for Saito, who was known for his deliberate, articulate observations, to have been left to wonder. I did my best to offer my perspective. I think the only one who could answer that question and admit to any wrongdoing would be Sanan himself. And maybe it wasn't only one moment of weakness, or an isolated incident. Perhaps without realizing it, this was the result of many mistakes that Sanan made in his search for purpose throughout all of this chaos. Maybe at some point, while making all of these mistakes, he realized things would never be the same. Saito watched me intently, listening to my answer without speaking. Eventually, his eyes fell to the ground.
So I, too, may succumb to such a fate.
What do you mean?
Succumbing to the bloodlust, watching my sanity slip away like sand from my fingers, eventually being unable to determine my own friends from my foes. My sense of what is right will become distorted, and I may forget everything that I believe. Such a fate will befall me, eventually.
All of the pain Saito was feeling came into clear focus. Sanan, our friend, whom we saw that day. For Saito, who struggled to come to terms with living with his affliction, maybe Sanan appeared like a crystal ball, offering a sinister glimpse into his future. don't think you'd end up like that. Just because the two of you drank the water of life does not mean that you are destined to experience the same fate as him.
Why is that?
Saito's expression was full of doubt, something that was so unlike him. Because you are strong, Saito. No matter what choice you are confronted with, I don't expect you to ever make the wrong one. I almost saw a smile curl in the corner of his lips, but his shoulders remained tense and guarded. Determined face.
I am not strong. If I were so strong, then I would not have required the water of life to defeat a demon.
Strength doesn't just come from your ability to fight in battle.
Then, from where does it come?
Well... His question came defensively, and I was thrown off a little by how much his delivery stung. Instead of answering, I retorted with my own question. Let me ask you something. Why is it that you keep your sword on the right side of your hip, Saito?
I told you that I am left-handed, had I not?
There are plenty of people who are left-handed in this world. But for swordsmen, most of them try and adapt with using their right hand, don't they? You said so yourself. No matter which dojo you'd attend, they would immediately attempt to correct you to use your right. What is it that made you keep going? That made you refuse to change? Realization. Saito had not anticipated me to turn the line of questioning back onto himself. His eyes widened. It appears I struck a nerve with him, and after an awkward pause, he finally answered.
Because there was nothing to change. My prowess was undeniable, even with my left hand. So why should I be made to change and use my right hand, and allow my technique to suffer thusly? A question for which I had no reasonable answer.
See? That just shows how strong you are, Saito.
What?
Because you kept with your resolve. You made a decision, and you stuck by it, and you fought for it despite all of the naysayers. I don't think that could have been easy for anyone to deal with. You asked yourself if the same fate will happen to you as it happened to Sanan. But I think you already know the answer. Only you can decide what is right for yourself, and with that attitude, it can only lead to good things. At least, that's what I think. Saito gazed at me stoically, gazing with puppy-like eyes and a docile expression. Whether or not my words resonated with him, or if they were completely worthless for all he cared, was unknown to me.
No one has ever said this to me before.
He spoke flatly, and he once again looked towards the smattering of stars glimmering across the sky. A gorgeous and serene sight indeed. Just like this boy. Man, Chizuru dropping them truth bombs left and right. That was very well done. I was worried I was going to have to pick a choice there, but she just knew what to say. I'm proud of you, Chizuru. That was a really good, line of reasoning you went down with this boy. Very well thought out. After the staged Imperial ambush out at Nagareyama, the Shinsengumi was scattered with the wind. The days of planning and acting as a collective group seemed to be long behind us. Without a knowledge of what paths our comrades and allies were heading, all we could do was adapt, one day at a time, left to tend our fates against the unknown. Despite these circumstances, Saito heroically led the remaining men to Aizu. According to scout reports, the troops who had fought against the Shinsengumi and Kofu were now marching to the northeast to subjugate whatever resistance remained. Supposedly, it was the Aizu who were currently engaging against the tide of incoming Imperial soldiers. Nagakura and Harada, sadly, had never returned to the Shinsengumi after their hasty departure. However, rumors of their activity, including the formation of their own unit, which was headed for Aizu, greatly aroused my attention. Aroused? Chizuru, you're on Saito's route. Goodness, girl. It was under such pretenses, clinging onto whatever normalcy we could reclaim, that we had arrived in Aizu. Really? We're gonna catch back up with Shin and Asano? That would be so cool. Because they just vanished last time. They're like, you'll hear from us, I'm sure. Never did. But it's the beginning of a new chapter, so I want to make sure. Warrior record, right? Yes, full bloom. Well, hey. One could hardly believe it was July, as cool, blustery winds flowed from down the mountain ranges overhead. A summer in Aizu proved far more temperate than any I had experienced in either Edo or Kyoto. Our march to the city was met with the bright chirping of bugs and insects along the well-traveled paths. For us, our arrival followed an arduous but hopeful journey, and a reunion that took months in the making.
Long time no see. Sorry for taking so long to catch up.
I got worried thinking about what would happen if the Imperial Army got here before us and wiped out all of our allies, but... Of course Hajime wouldn't mess up like that.
Hijikata, Heisuke, I'm so glad to see that you are both safe. My emotions got the better of me, and I wept flowing tears that glistened atop my smiling cheeks. Yay, and you guys are still okay too.
Now that you have returned, Commander, it feels like we have 100 men on our side.
Yeah! Sounds like even the Imperial Army is afraid of the Shinsengumi's demon commander. Let's show those bastards in the Empire of Japan what we're made of!
You all haven't changed a bit.
Saito, on the other hand.
Commander, what happened to your foot?
Until Saito mentioned it, I hadn't noticed that Hijikata was dragging his left leg as he walked. Oh?
Oh, this. Nothing. I messed it up a little bit back in the battle in Utsunomiya. Doesn't hurt too much, but I don't think I'll be doing any running for a while around the battlefield. Such a pain in the ass.
Even though he was dealt a less than thrilling hand, I hadn't seen such an enthusiastic, positive response from Hijikata in a while, and he was smiling, no less. Okay, so he's still changing his attitude. And his leg's messed up this time around. Is Kondo still around right now, or has he been executed yet?
Saito, heard you and your men have been taking care of some Imperial soldiers on your way up, that right? A little bird's been humming in my ear about it. No. Shirikawa Castle was under siege, and I joined their front lines. Unfortunately, our efforts proved futile. Enemies had taken the gate, making it impossible for us to retake the castle, and we were driven back. How much longer we can support the front lines is unknown.
Saito solemnly delivered his report detailing the challenges he'd faced, but Hijikata looked at him kindly.
Hey, you're putting your neck out there for us.
Something peculiar raised my attention. In the past, Hijikata had acted on a policy of sternness and discipline, making him a lot harder to approach. Now, however, his demeanor was far more relaxed and sympathetic. A far cry from the commander under whom I had served. I wondered to myself if during our separation he had experienced a change of heart, one that challenged him to open himself up to those he had cherished most. As I ruminated upon this thought, Saito then asked the question about which all of us had been worrying. Okay, I'm glad the Bean just has no fear about asking all these difficult questions.
Commander, how is Chief Kondo?
Hijikata fell silent. He let out a heavy sigh, and his gaze dropped timidly to face his feet. His answer, expectedly, was short.
I couldn't save him.
Somewhere in our hearts, we had all anticipated this answer, but having it expressed so directly. There was nothing to stop our hearts from sinking, for each following breath to be drawn into our lungs was like pulling tar from the cracked, dark earth.
So, I assume he was ordered to commit seppuku.
Hijikata shook his head.
No. He was beheaded.
Beheaded? Although both seppuku and beheading were public forms of execution, what they meant were different entirely. Ancient legends used to say that a human soul was stored inside their abdomen. So, by committing seppuku and slicing open your chest cavity, it meant cutting into the place where your soul took refuge. No easy feat indeed. Compare this to the act of beheading, where your neck is efficiently struck with a thick, sharp blade. A death, I imagine, that was painless compared to seppuku. Seppuku was a statement, and by confronting death in such a manner, a warrior's honor was preserved. It was the embodiment of chivalry in one last act. However, there is no honor in being beheaded. There are no appeals or vestiges of respect. There is only silence, until the blade is fallen.
Kondo requested for them to let him put his sword through his chest, but those imperial bastards... they...
As Hijikata recounted Kondo's fate, he started to choke up as he spoke, struggling to articulate the visceral image as he conjured it in his mind. He took a deep breath, and through gritted teeth we heard what became of our chief.
They scoffed, saying that he's just a farmer's boy. They laughed at him for wanting an honorable death. That was for samurai.
Never before had I seen Hijikata so vexed, so disturbed. Saito, however, took all of this in without speaking, and he stared plaintively at the floor. After a pause, he lifted his head and spoke.
Such an emotional response is understandable. I cannot fathom how troubled the chief must have felt.
Hijikata turned up to look at Saito. Through moist, tear-soaked eyes, he shot a bitter glance at Saito that made my hair stand.
He wasn't troubled!
Hijikata's aggressive response surprised all of us, but Saito's eyes grew wide in astonishment. He could only stare back at the visibly shaken Hijikata, questioning what he could have meant.
When those imperial sons of bitches put him down, and they told him they'd take his head off, I bet you anything that they hoped he'd just cry and piss his pants, and beg and plead them for mercy. But from what I heard, when he was given his sentence, he took it like a man. Didn't even shed a tear, or bitch and moan. All he'd said was, "I see. Suppose it can't be helped," with his usual smile. That's all. And he said, "I cannot enter the afterlife with such a slovenly appearance, so allow me to shave my face at the very least." Of all the men in the world to die, did it have to be him? Even though he was born into a common family, or that he wasn't given an honorable death. No matter what anyone says, no one will ever be more of a true samurai than him. How many other men in this world can lift their heads proudly and stand their ground in the face of death like he did?
Saito fell silent. Hijikata's words fell heavily on the ears of everyone in the room, and we were speechless. The room of outside. They rang so true to what we had been feeling but couldn't say. Just then,
I have a message. The Aizu domain is planning one more offensive strike to take back Shirakawa Castle. Understood. Then we shall leave with them.
just as Saito looked over to his men to give the command, a voice stopped him.
No, we aren't leaving with them. We're heading to Sendai.
All it took was Hijikata's order for Saito to freeze.
Commander, what do you mean? This is coming all the way from the old shogunate leaders. The Shinsengumi is heading to Sendai to fight alongside the domains in the northeast. So, you mean to suggest we abandon the Aizu? Look, if I could, I'd fight alongside the Aizu till I've got nothing left. But the order to leave for Sendai is coming from the Aizu as well.
In other words, it seemed that the Aizu's plot to strike the castle was a decoy for the Shinsengumi to escape and support the northeast safely. If that was the wish of Lieutenant General Matsudaira, then perhaps the Shinsengumi had no choice but to follow these orders. the official military title reserved for Katamori Matsudaira of the Aizu domain, who formerly led the Imperial Guard.
If these are the wishes of Lieutenant General Matsudaira, so be it. However, I cannot honor your command.
Saito!
Hijikata shot Saito a stern look, like an instructor staring down upon his student. But this did nothing to faze Saito, who merely gazed back at him coldly.
The Shinsengumi owes a great deal of gratitude to the Aizu domain. Simply put, had the Aizu domain not been there for us, the Shinsengumi would likely not exist. And beyond this, it was Lord Aizu himself who named the Shinsengumi. And the Aizu are risking their lives by fighting against the Imperial Army. As I see it, there is no better opportunity for us to repay our debt to the Aizu domain.
Saito's words were so decisive that Hijikata stood in shock. I couldn't blame him. Never once had Saito ever stated his opinion with such force and purpose to Hijikata.
So, you want to stick around here, turning your back on my and Lord Matsudaira's orders, is that it?
The 9th generation daimyo of the Aizu domain, he holds the position of Kyoto Military Commissioner. He supported the Shinsengumi.
Yes. My title as a samurai was stripped from me, which made me as good as dead. But the Shinsengumi, and Lord Aizu especially, brought me back to life. To myself, the Shinsengumi and the Aizu epitomize what the path of the warrior truly means. Abandoning the Aizu means turning my back on this path. I see. I guess I understand where you're coming from. But are you sure about this? The Satsuma and Choshu, especially the Choshu, have a real bone to pick with the Aizu. They probably hate the Aizu more than the whole goddamn shogunate put together. They'll hit you with everything they got. If they kill you, I've no doubt they'll treat your body like trash. I am well prepared for such a scenario.
Saito's willingness elicited a wry smirk from Hijikata.
Then, I guess that means this is goodbye for us. I apologize. Aw, come on. No need. Seems like you've made up your mind, so there's no use for me to put you down for it. But man, I never knew you could talk so much. I don't know if I've ever seen that side of you.
Hijikata let out a hearty chuckle, but Saito continued staring at the ground. Or perhaps he couldn't bring himself to look up.
Hijikata, do you remember when I had first arrived at Chie Hall?
A wide grin curled from Hijikata's lips as he showed eagerness to respond.
I couldn't forget it if I tried.
Yay! Ah, it's my boys! Yay! I miss their friendship so much. Meh.
We never had any bamboo swords at Chie Hall. Just those wooden ones that you bastards would use to beat the hell out of each other. Jeez. I remember Soji was the first to challenge you to a fight, and I worried the two of you would break 5 or 6 bones all accounted for. Worst case, one of you could have died. And goddamn Soji. Kid used so much force, I was sure he'd kill you with his wooden sword. If we hadn't put a stop to it, then one of you would be dead on that floor, still as a rock.
There was a bright glimmer of nostalgia coming from Hijikata's eyes as he reminisced about Chie Hall. Kondo, Hijikata, Sanon, Okita, Nagakura, Harada, and Heisuke. The place where all of the Shinsengumi men had spent their youth. And for Saito, it was a home of refuge in which he could forge both his identity and his technique. A place to call home.
For the first time ever, no one referred to me as a coward, or a heretic, or some other callous term once our matches were completed. Well, when it comes to crossing real swords, there's no time to bother with any shit-talking. They'd stick the sword in your mouth as quick as you could open it. Besides, What idiot would call putting your sword on your right hip cheating? From your perspective, pretty much everyone else was cheating too.
Coming from Hijikata, those words must have been the greatest gift Saito could have ever received.
Back then, I believed in one thing. That if the order came from either you or Kondo, I could kill anyone, no matter if it were some nationalist patriot or even a daimyo.
A person who devotes themselves to their country, sometimes even going so far as to give their life.
Yeah. Well, we kinda touted you around and made you do all the dirty work. So, sorry about that.
Saito shook his head curtly in response to Hijikata's apology.
It was my will to accept those missions and execute as requested. I chose to follow your orders. And I intend to do so thusly. However... Hey, Saito. Don't beat yourself up for us heading our separate ways. You served who you wanted to. No, beyond that. You carved out a life that mattered to you. That's all there is to it. Your path is your own, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Saito looked to be fighting back tears. Oh, my heart. He subtly dug his teeth into his lips, trying to hold back the deluge of emotion that was waiting to burst. But even so, he spoke with a restrained monotone. Perhaps if he hadn't done so, his voice would be little more than a blubbering mess of emotion. So, in typical fashion, Saito was attempting to remain taciturn in the face of duty. After a moment, Hijikata turned to Shimada.
Shimada, where are you off to next? I will follow you, of course, Hijikata, sir. I have come this far, and wherever you shall go, I shall go.
What about you, Heisuke? Are you leaving with Hijikata as well?
Well, I mean, I kinda died once already, so... This whole time, I've been wondering to myself what I wanted out of life enough to dodge that whole death thing and come back.
Heisuke stopped himself. Did you think of an answer?
Well...
Heisuke scratched his nose absent-mindedly before timidly assuming a reflective tone.
If I died that day, before I ever got the chance to become a Fury, I think I would have just been thinking about one thing as I savored my last moment. I gotta see how the Shinsengumi's gonna end up, since I was there since it started and all.
Hey, Heisuke, what the hell do you mean, ends up? You're talking like the Shinsengumi's going under. Don't jinx it, stupid.
Hijikata glared at Heisuke, but then he stuck out his tongue playfully. Nice.
Besides, Hijikata's losing his men left and right. Gotta have someone tough to watch his back.
Oh. What about you guys, Soma and Nomura?
We're leaving with the commander as well.
That's right. We're in it for the long haul. We're gonna follow him till the end of time.
I see. This whole time, I've been walking alongside the men of the Shinsengumi. But now, our paths are splintering, and it seems each of us has a destiny to fulfill. I suppose I'd be lying if I said that I wouldn't miss them, but like Hijikata said, their path is their own.
So what about you, Yukimura? Where are you off to next?
Hijikata had mentioned that this place would soon become a battlefield, fraught with death and danger. If I were to remain here, I likely would stand no chance. However, the same choice fell on Saito's shoulders. If either of us chose a different path, it was likely that the two of us would never see one another again. I contemplated. Do I really wanna... I will stay here. My answer came to everyone's surprise. The individual who seemed most stupefied was Saito, whose expressions was still aimed towards the ground in a fit to suppress his emotions. Although the words hadn't come from his mouth, his brows told the entire story, furrowed with so much curiosity as to why I answered how I did.
You heard our entire conversation just now, didn't you? Aizu's about to become hell on earth. If you stay here, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that you'd get your ass killed in a horrible way. So in spite of all that, you really want to stay?
Yes. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. But the thought of living my life away from Saito, scattered somewhere else while he fought here, I couldn't think of another option.
Maybe I shouldn't even bother asking.
As Hijikata expressed his resignation, he glanced over at Saito. He knows what's up. In turn, Saito's gaze was fixed on me, staring at me with the same stoic blue eyes I'd always admired.
All right. I'm gonna give you a chance to talk it over. If you change your mind, you can always catch up with us later, kid.
With that, Hijikata kindly patted my shoulder with his hand. Thank you, sir. Then he turned around and began sauntering down the mountain path alongside Shimada, Heisuke, Soma, and Nomura. As soon as their footsteps were out of earshot, Saito broke the silence.
Why was that your answer?
It had been so long since I'd found myself on the other end of one of Saito's frigid questions. The bite in his voice made my stomach drop, but I stood tall and stayed put.
It is not too late. Run after Hijikata and go with them.
No.
Had you been ignoring everything that was discussed earlier? War and bloodshed will ravage Aizu like wildfire. There is no guarantee of your safety this time. You will die, and your life will have been a waste.
I looked straight at Saito, facing his harsh words head-on, and I turned the questions back to him. Saito, you plan on dying on this battlefield, do you? No answer came from him at first. Surely he had planned on explaining some lie in order to save face. Instead, he grimaced angrily and threw his hands into the air as if he had abandoned his original answer.
So what if I am?
In this moment, I realized that any sentiment shared between Saito and myself was thinner than a strand of hair. We'd never exchanged promises for the future. In all actuality, I had no clue what Saito thought of me, much less if those thoughts bloomed into anything real. Girl, he in full bloom. Don't you worry. We got this. All that we had to fall back upon were our words. Perhaps only in the space of our conversations had I done anything to climb into his heart, but only just. Even so, I had to try. Then I'm staying here too. I won't leave your side until the very end. As the words escaped my lips, Saito scowled at me with such ferocity. It was as if his eyes could summon daggers that were aimed right for me.
Is it because I saved your life? The command to protect you came directly from Hijikata. All I did was follow orders. You need not expose yourself to danger on my behalf, meaning there is no business that requires your presence. Hurry and take your leave.
But I refused to move. Instead, I balled my hands into tight fists and spoke. That's not it. I don't want to stay with you just because you saved my life.
Then why?
I was tired of being placed at the center of his questions, and instead I fought back. Go, go, Chizuru, go! Is it too much to ask to want to be with you? My heart pounded furiously in my chest, realizing I was challenging a man who stored his anger silently behind his vacant expressions. But I was steadfast in staring into his eyes, patiently attempting to draw whatever truth I could from them. Saito once said to me that the heart sings its song through the eyes. That's true. Pools of azure floated idly in his irises, and I was lost in them as their light made its way to me. Eventually, he turned away.
I cannot bear the thought of your death.
At last, an honest truth came from his tired lips. And so, too, relief came to me. Saito had exposed his heart to me, face to face. Well, I can't bear the thought of yours either, Saito. But this is a truth I've come to accept. The truth that one day you may not return to me. But I also accept that if you abandon the Aizu when they need you most, you may regret it forever. So grant me this. I want to remain at your side. Until I can no longer breathe, I am yours.
Wow! That's quite a line.
I know that this is rather selfish of me to request. Saito took in everything I had said, quietly considering my humble words. It looked as though each word was turned over and over again in his head, perhaps searching for one last way to convince me to leave with Hijikata. But... ha-ha! All of that. Finally.
I am not as strong of a person as you think me to be.
Out of the blue came a tender reflection.
The power to determine what is right or what is wrong in the circumstance eludes me. Until now, I find myself torn. Part of me hopes to follow Hijikata, as if I still have time to change my mind. Do I die at the hands of my enemy, or do I wait until the madness of the water of life takes me instead? Of the latter option, I have no confidence in living. That my sword swings true until my last breath is all I wish for. I hope that, in my passing, I will go nobly, like Kondo before me. In order to do so, I must commit what remains of my life to this path I have laid out before me. That is why I decided to stay in Aizu.
His tone didn't have the same detached nonchalantness to which I had become accustomed, but rather it was a frustrated expression of the state between him and me. This was likely Saito's inner self revealed, the true Saito who bore no need for pretense.
However, if you are looking at the man before you as an impenetrable warrior without fault, then the truth is best kept privy to the likes of you. For now, perhaps parting is more appropriate. So, go. To be quite honest, the thought of you witnessing myself at my worst is an unsavory one.
His voice was hushed, but his words struck such a potent nerve with me that it was as if he were screaming them into my face. And still, I refused to move. I don't think you should worry too much about whether or not you're making the right choice. And this is something that's stressing you out. So whatever choice you make, I will be there to support you, no matter what. And no matter what happens to you, I will never think anything less of you. So, please, let me stay with you. I could see Saito's eyes widen. Our silence brought with it a nervous tension, and I almost felt as though he would strike me. Girl, this boy love you. You crazy. Or even grab my wrists and drag me to Hijikata's convoy himself. Oh, come on, give me that kiss. As impatience and dread began to get the better of me. Come on, come on, come on. Oh my. Look at them noses. Saito came close to me, our faces only an inch apart. Hello. His slender fingers wrapped around my neck, and then he cozily drew me in to embrace me tightly. Those gorgeous blue eyes were gazing into my own, and together we basked in an unspoken comfort. His lower lip quivered as if he could break into tears at any moment. Within Saito's timid embrace, our eyes were locked together, but then he pulled back in a nervous stupor.
So, is this what you truly want?
Every word he spoke sounded like he was working to convince himself of my answer, rather than an honest, inquisitive one. I mean, inquisitive tone, sorry. I'm just so distracted that they're both blushing in this picture. It's so cute.
You won't come to regret it later. What you just said, that is how you actually feel, right?
Saito's leer was piercing, and with both eyes he was searching desperately for validation. It was the first time I'd seen such an urgent, vulnerable expression behind his eyes, which had seen a lifetime of pain. So I told him the truth. Yes. I want nothing more than to be with you, Saito. Please take me with you. I looked up at Saito, telling the man whom I had loved everything I knew he had yearned to hear. Saito's eyes moistened ever so slightly. And for a brief moment, he seemed caught in an emotional limbo between laughter and crying. Aww.
Your eyes are full of truth. Within them is an inimitable honesty, as if your eyes could summon the very thoughts of your heart. Behind them, I see no hint of deceit.
A wave of relief seemed to come over Saito, and he gulped anxiously. Then his lips slowly approached mine. Just before our lips touched, Saito contemplated for just a beat. And then, as if he were repeating my words again in his head, his lips curled into a smile. Don't show me your hand when their lips meet! Come on! At last, our lips met. It was the first time I'd ever kissed a man. At first, my heart raced frantically, pounding harder than I'd ever felt, and then I was enveloped by a warm sense of calm. Saito's supple lips quivered preciously against mine. If only this kiss were a promise for the future, beyond a blissful ephemera. But what lies in store for us, we do not know. It could be a lifetime of despair and woe, but even then... The moist, tender touch of his full lips pressed against mine as we exchanged a moment of passion gave me a life's worth of happiness. In this moment, our hearts became one. You're not going to show me the lips on lips, are you? And this alone was enough for us as we considered our lives hanging in the balance of our future. Dang it!